During the first 2 days of April 2009, Kimberly was completely unable to reach Kate, her roommate in California. This quickly made Kimberly uneasy. She called Kate's phone numerous times, but the other end remained silent. Not a single call was answered. For those who knew Kate, this silence was extremely unusual. Kate was someone who lived by strict principles and was highly responsible, rarely changing her schedule or disappearing suddenly without leaving any message. Kimberly's worry became even more apparent when she remembered that April 1st was the due date for rent. Kate had always paid on time without fail, never late even by a single day. But this time, there was no word from Kate. All these details combined made Kimberly sense that something terrible had happened. On the afternoon of April 2nd, 2009, after hours of hesitation and fear, Kimberly decided to find Kate's mother's phone number and call to report that her daughter had been out of contact for 2 days. Upon hearing the news, Kate's family immediately drove to the apartment in a state of extreme panic. Around 7 p.m., they arrived at their daughter's residence. As soon as they entered the apartment, Kate's mother and Kimberly turned on the lights and searched throughout the bedroom. But when the closet door was opened, Kimberly suddenly froze. Before her eyes was Kate's motionless body, curled up in that cramped space. The horrifying truth hit her so hard that Kimberly panicked, turned, and ran out of the room, screaming for help in desperation. Immediately after, Kate's parents rushed into the room, and when they saw their daughter, they burst into uncontrollable sobs. In their panic and anguish, the couple struggled to pull their daughter's body out of the narrow closet. But it was all too late. Kate had stopped breathing long ago, her body cold and stiff, already showing clear signs of decomposition. The brutally cruel scene nearly caused both parents to collapse on the spot, unable to stand before the pain of losing their child. In her shock, Kimberly hurriedly reported the incident to Long Beach police. When the first investigators arrived at the scene, just one look at the overall picture was enough for police to quickly conclude that this was not a natural death, but rather a murder of particularly brutal nature, with a series of signs that made even experienced investigators shudder. The victim's body was discovered in an extremely horrific condition. Kate was wearing only a thin top that had been pulled up haphazardly to her chest, while her lower body was completely unclothed. Most notably, a leather belt had been wrapped multiple times tightly around Kate's neck, as if the killer had deliberately ensured the victim had no chance to breathe. Additionally, Kate's mouth was stuffed with a black pair of underwear, later identified as the victim's own personal item. Furthermore, investigators discovered that both of Kate's nostrils had been packed full of pain relief tablets. All these signs together painted a cold and cruel scenario. The killer had deliberately blocked every airway of the victim, from the mouth, nose, to the throat, causing Kate to die from prolonged asphyxiation. This was clearly not an impulsive act, but an intentional method of killing, carried out with careful calculation. The belt was later removed for forensic examination. Results showed it was a 44-inch leather belt, the type typically used by men, and its surface still had many strands of the victim's hair attached, becoming an important piece of physical evidence. Beyond the signs of asphyxiation, police also noted serious injuries to Kate's head and neck area. At least 3 clean-cut wounds were found on the back of her head and nape. Although these wounds were not immediately fatal, forensic experts determined they were forceful enough to render the victim dazed and unable to resist before being killed by the perpetrator. However, amid that gruesome scene, investigators quickly noticed an extremely unusual detail. Instead of the strong smell of death typically found at murder scenes, Kate's bedroom was permeated with the scent of soap and air freshener, a clean fragrance so out of place it was almost completely opposite to the brutal reality present before them. The bedroom window was wide open, as if someone had deliberately created air circulation. On the floor, inside the closet, and even on the victim's body itself, investigators found scattered dryer sheets. Moreover, there was an essential oil diffuser plugged in the room, continuously releasing fragrance, attempting to mask the decomposition smell that could not be entirely concealed. All these details immediately revealed a chilling truth. The killer had not left immediately after committing the crime. On the contrary, that person appeared to have remained at the scene for quite a long time, long enough to clean up, arrange things, and particularly to painstakingly find every way to erase traces and eliminate odors, with the sole purpose of delaying the discovery of the incident. This was not the behavior of someone panicking after accidentally causing harm. The use of dryer sheets, the oil diffuser, and opening the window demonstrated clear-headed, cold, and deliberate calculation. The method of the attack, the level of brutality, combined with the composure in staging the scene, indicated that the killer was most likely someone who knew the victim, perhaps even someone with a close and intimate relationship, rather than a random attacker. From these initial assessments, police quickly shifted to gathering personal information and examining relationships surrounding Kate to narrow down the investigation. According to information provided by family members, Kate Suji was born in 1988, the daughter of a Korean immigrant family living in California. Growing up in a disciplined and orderly family environment, Kate early on developed a serious, principled, and responsible lifestyle. At the time of the incident, Kate was just 20 years old, studying nursing at California State University, Long Beach. In the eyes of family and friends, she was a diligent, gentle student with high self-awareness, always putting her studies first. Because of this maturity, Kate's family placed absolute trust in her. In early 2009, after much consideration, they agreed to let Kate move out on her own to make commuting to school and daily life more convenient. Kate moved into an apartment near campus, living with Kimberly Raymond, a fellow student she had never met before. Despite being away from family for the first time, Kate never let herself go or became careless. On the contrary, she always strived to live independently, attending classes regularly while working part-time to cover living expenses. Every month, Kate paid her share of the rent on time, never needing Kimberly to remind or complain. It was precisely this disciplined and responsible lifestyle that made Kate's sudden disappearance extremely suspicious. The moment she was absent for just one day without prior notice, Kimberly immediately sensed something was wrong. Because with Kate's character, leaving home or losing contact without a message was something that simply could not happen. Regarding her personal life, Kate had a boyfriend named Jonathan Heen. This was also her first love. The two had started dating in high school, and throughout all those years, Kate had never loved anyone other than Jonathan. The argument quickly escalated. In her anger, Kate forcefully gathered Jonathan's belongings into piles and threw them hard toward the door, simultaneously demanding loudly that he leave the house immediately. The atmosphere at that moment was extremely tense. After throwing everything out, Kate stood with her arms crossed, her face flushed with anger, her eyes reddened as she glared at Jonathan as if she had made an irreversible decision. According to Kimberly, that was the last moment she saw Kate when her friend was still alive. Recognizing the situation was too tense and not wanting to be drawn into the couple's private affairs, Kimberly decided to leave the apartment earlier than usual to go exercise, intending to give Kate and Jonathan space to resolve their conflict on their own. Around 6 p.m., Kimberly unexpectedly received a missed call from Kate's phone number. When she called back, the person who answered was not Kate, but Jonathan. Jonathan said the two had continued arguing, and in her anger, Kate had left and gone somewhere unknown. He appeared worried and asked Kimberly to help find Kate. At the same time, Jonathan pleaded to stay at the apartment, explaining that he was holding Kate's phone and keys and wanted to wait for her to return so he could give them back. Kimberly agreed to let Jonathan stay temporarily, but she also advised him straightforwardly that if Kate had asked him to leave, continuing to stay would only make the situation more tense and would not lead to any good outcome. Around 7 p.m., Kimberly returned to the apartment. When she entered, she noticed the place was completely dark, with no sign of anyone inside. The bottom lock was secured, but the top lock was not engaged, suggesting someone had left in a rather hurried state. Jonathan had clearly left the premises. The bags of his belongings that Kate had thrown out earlier had also disappeared without a trace. Not only that, but Kate's car, which was usually parked near the apartment, was also gone. A strong sense of unease rose when Kimberly called Kate's phone again, but this time, the other end was completely silent. No one answered. From Kimberly's detailed statement, the name Jonathan Hoyne, the victim's boyfriend, quickly came under special scrutiny by police. To investigators, Jonathan was the last person confirmed to have been with Kate before she disappeared, and the intense conflict between them that day made him an individual who could not be overlooked. Jonathan's personal information was immediately sent to law enforcement agencies throughout the state. According to records, Jonathan Huynh was a Vietnamese-American young man, 20 years old, from Mission Viejo in Orange County, with a tall and thin build. Notably, Jonathan frequently used Kate's gray Toyota, making tracking his whereabouts even more urgent. Shortly after, a statewide alert was issued requesting local police units to assist with the search. Simultaneously, Kate's family actively cooperated with investigators, providing all the information they could remember related to Jonathan. According to the family, Jonathan had a habit of playing video games and frequently visited The Block, a large and bustling shopping center in Orange County. This detail immediately caught the detectives' attention, as it could be a familiar destination for the suspect after leaving the apartment. From here, police quickly developed an important investigative lead, tracking the signal from the victim's phone. Analysis of location data showed that Kate's phone was still active, and more alarmingly, it was transmitting a signal from the area of The Block at Orange, not far from Long Beach. On the morning of April 3rd, 2009, a special surveillance team was dispatched to the parking lot of The Block shopping center to conduct covert observation. There, they quickly spotted Kate's Toyota parked quietly amid the crowded lot, as if it had been there for a long time. Determining this could be an important lead, police decided not to act hastily, but instead quietly position their forces, patiently monitoring the vehicle for many hours. Time passed tensely. It wasn't until around 6 p.m. that the wait paid off. A young man appeared from the distance, walking rather calmly among the shoppers. When he approached the Toyota, he opened the car door with a key, then headed straight to the trunk. There, he pulled out a dress shirt and casually changed clothes right in the middle of the parking lot, as if nothing unusual was happening. Within just a few seconds of observation, the surveillance officers immediately identified this as Jonathan Huynh, the suspect they had been urgently searching for. The entire team immediately heightened their alertness, following his every small movement. Yet contrary to the tension of the surveillance team, Jonathan remained completely calm. After changing his shirt, he closed the trunk, turned around, and walked straight into the shopping center, apparently unaware that he was fully within police sights. The detectives continued to tail Jonathan from behind, maintaining a safe distance to avoid detection. Inside the shopping area, they witnessed a scene that sent chills down more than a few spines. Jonathan casually walked into a game store, immersing himself in the lively entertainment atmosphere. He participated in playing video games, even laughing and joking with other players. Around 8 p.m., after observing long enough and sensing the timing was right, police decided to approach Jonathan Huynh. To avoid causing panic among the people around them in the shopping center, the detectives wore plain clothes, approached gently, identified themselves as police, and politely requested Jonathan's cooperation in coming with them to discuss the disappearance of Kate Suji. Faced with this invitation, Jonathan neither resisted nor appeared panicked. On the contrary, he maintained a rather calm, almost indifferent attitude, which made the investigators even more cautious. To avoid attracting public attention, the detectives escorted Jonathan to an unmarked police car parked nearby to conduct an initial quick interview. When seated in the car, Jonathan began playing the role of an innocent and clueless bystander. He claimed he didn't know where Kate was, saying the two had broken up and where she went was no longer his concern. However, this excessive nonchalance and emotionless manner of answering only made the atmosphere in the car heavier and more suspicious. More notably, instead of just answering questions, Jonathan began asking the police unnecessary questions in return, such as whether they had taken fingerprints yet, or how they had tracked Kate's phone location. These questions might have seemed casual on the surface, but to experienced detectives, they bore the hallmarks of probing behavior, as if Jonathan was trying to gauge how much the investigating agency already knew. After a few minutes of evasive but tense conversation, the investigators realized that a quick on-site interview was no longer appropriate. They immediately decided to transport Jonathan to Long Beach Police Headquarters, where proper facilities existed for a more thorough interrogation. At the interrogation room, Jonathan Huyn initially maintained his evasive attitude and denied any involvement. He repeated that he didn't know where Kate was, trying to construct the image of an ex-boyfriend who had broken up and had nothing more to do with the victim's life. However, when investigators laid important evidence on the table, particularly the information that they had found Kate's body along with numerous clear signs of murder, Jonathan's demeanor began to visibly waver. Under increasing pressure, Jonathan was forced to change his story. He admitted that he had been at the apartment on March 31st, but firmly denied killing Kate. According to him, the two had been together and intimate that day, after which a heated argument arose over money matters. Jonathan claimed that in her anger, Kate had hastily left, while he stayed at the apartment to pack up his belongings. Not stopping there, Jonathan deliberately steered the narrative toward a sensitive direction, saying that Kate was someone who enjoyed rough, intimate experiences. He admitted that the two had previously used a belt during intimacy, but hastily emphasized, "The last time I saw her, we didn't use any belt at all." Clearly, this was an attempt to mislead the investigation, planting in police minds the possibility that Kate's death was related to an accident during intimacy. However, the story Jonathan constructed immediately revealed too many holes. If Kate had truly stormed off in anger on her own, why were all her essential belongings, from her phone, keys to her car, in Jonathan's possession? And if nothing had happened in the apartment, why did the scene show clear signs of cleanup and concealment? Finally, after many hours of intense interrogation, facing sharp questions and tight reasoning from investigators, Jonathan Huyn had no way out. The disguise he had carefully constructed gradually collapsed, and Jonathan was forced to confess part of the truth. He lowered his head and admitted that Kate had died right in the bedroom that afternoon, but still clung to one final excuse: it was just an unintentional accident. According to Jonathan's final statement, when Kate suggested breaking up, the two had a violent altercation. In his anger, he claimed he had only hit his girlfriend once, causing Kate to fall to the floor, go into convulsions, and lose consciousness. Jonathan insisted he had no intention of killing anyone and that Kate's death was something he could not have anticipated. Panicking at the scene, Jonathan said he had tried to perform CPR to save his girlfriend, but all efforts were futile. Instead of seeking help or calling emergency services, Jonathan made a cold and unacceptable decision. He claimed that out of fear, confusion, and not knowing what to do, he had hidden Kate's body in the closet, then hurriedly left the scene, leaving the truth buried in silence for many days afterward. The self-defense and accident story Jonathan presented completely contradicted the brutal scene police had directly witnessed, which clearly showed signs of intentional murder and calculated concealment. Nevertheless, this confession provided sufficient legal grounds for investigators to arrest Jonathan Huyn on charges of homicide. That very night, Jonathan was detained at the county jail, with bail set at $1 million, while awaiting trial to face justice. According to investigative records, Jonathan Alexander Huyn was 20 years old at the time of the crime, a Vietnamese-American young man born and raised in Orange County, California. Jonathan had known Kate Suji since their high school years, and not long after, the two began dating, becoming each other's first love. On the surface, this appeared to be an innocent young love story, but reality was entirely different. Early on, those around them had noticed this relationship showed many signs of instability. Kate's friends repeatedly expressed concern, believing Jonathan was obsessed with his girlfriend to the point of being unhealthy, far beyond the boundaries of normal love. They observed that Jonathan had a highly possessive nature, always wanting to control Kate's every action, frequently jealous without cause, and more than once behaving in strange, inexplicable ways. For this reason, friends had advised Kate to be cautious, even to consider ending the relationship. Indeed, their relationship was never smooth. After graduating high school in 2006, the two broke up once, then got back together about a year later. However, from the time they reconciled, Jonathan seemed to cling to Kate inseparably. He frequently stayed overnight at Kate's apartment 4 to 5 days every week, gradually turning his girlfriend's living space into his own, regardless of the presence and feelings of others. Kimberly, Kate's roommate, had also clearly expressed unease about Jonathan. She said Jonathan exhibited very strange behaviors, awkward in communication, with unpredictable moods, sometimes appearing submissive, other times suddenly irritable. Particularly, there were moments when the look in Jonathan's eyes as he gazed at Kate emanated something twisted, almost crazed, making Kimberly shudder. Not only those close by, but even unfamiliar neighbors had sensed this abnormality. Once, a neighbor happened to chat with Jonathan and was stunned by his fierce rage when Kate was mentioned. In his frustration, Jonathan complained that Kate doesn't invest in the relationship like I do, always just demanding money. These words revealed that dissatisfaction, jealousy, and resentment had been silently accumulating in Jonathan's heart for a very long time, just waiting for a moment to explode. During the period from late 2007 to 2009, Jonathan Huyn had no stable job or notable achievements. His life passed by vaguely, without direction, and it seemed Jonathan's biggest concern each day revolved only around Kate. He spent most of his time scrolling Facebook, playing video games, displaying a childish personality, lacking responsibility, and having no clear goals for the future. Yet behind that seemingly harmless exterior lurked an extremely dangerous mindset. In Jonathan's thinking, Kate was no longer an independent person, but had gradually become his private property, something he believed he had absolute ownership of. According to statements the prosecutor presented later in court, from the very early days of dating, Jonathan had nurtured a distorted and frightening thought. If he couldn't have her, then he wouldn't let anyone else have her either. This pathological possessive mentality didn't emerge suddenly. It quietly grew over the months and years, embedding itself deep in his psyche. Kate's friends had witnessed many times her melancholy and exhausted moments after endless arguments. Jonathan was frequently jealous without cause, constantly suspecting Kate of having someone else, or flying into rage whenever she didn't meet his unreasonable demands. Kate was inherently a gentle, patient girl, so for a long time she tried to endure, hoping things would get better. But the longer it went on, the more she realized this relationship was becoming toxic, suffocating her life and spirit. Entering early 2009, Kate began actively creating distance from Jonathan. She focused more on her studies, attended church more regularly, found peace again in her spiritual life, and connected with new friends. These changes, instead of bringing Jonathan to his senses, triggered his fear of losing control. For Jonathan, Kate gradually pulling away wasn't just losing a girlfriend, it was losing the ownership he had always assumed was his. Around March 2009, Kate expressed her desire to end the relationship with this highly controlling boyfriend. But for Jonathan, this wasn't simply a breakup. It was an unforgivable betrayal. In his twisted mind, Kate owed him loyalty, and if she dared to leave, he would rather destroy her than let her belong to another man. It can be said that Jonathan Huyn's motive for the crime stemmed from blind jealousy and selfishness that had warped into pathology. To him, Kate was no longer an independent person with the right to choose her own life, but only something that had to belong to him at any cost. More frightening still, after committing the crime, Jonathan showed no signs of remorse or regret whatsoever. On the contrary, his subsequent actions revealed a chilling coldness. Jonathan was clear-headed enough to plan the concealment of his crime, calm enough to eat, play, and go about his life as if no life had been taken by his own hands. At that point, the killer's mentality could only be summed up in 2 words: cold-blooded. Throughout the investigation process spanning more than a year, from 2009 into 2010, police and prosecutors gradually reconstructed the entire sequence of events based on a tight system of forensic evidence and witness testimony. The autopsy results reached a clear and undeniable conclusion. Kate Suji died from asphyxiation. The mechanism of death was determined in very specific detail. The underwear stuffed tightly in her mouth caused the victim's tongue to recede backward, completely blocking the airway, while the belt wrapped tightly around her neck caused arterial obstruction, leading to severe and prolonged oxygen deprivation. On Kate's face and eyes, Forensic experts documented dense subcutaneous hemorrhaging and petechial hemorrhages, signs indicating she had been restrained with great force over a considerable period of time. Furthermore, 3 clean-cut wounds on the back of the head and nape area, each approximately half an inch deep, were also discovered. Although these wounds were not directly fatal, they were enough to render the victim dazed and severely weakened, creating conditions for the killer to continue the attack. All over Kate's body were numerous bruises and abrasions, consistent with the victim having struggled and resisted desperately. Particularly haunting was the detail that the tip of Kate's tongue bore clear bite marks, showing that in extreme oxygen deprivation, she had reflexively bitten down hard on her own tongue, a painful manifestation of survival instinct as death approached. All these traces were completely inconsistent with the accidental or unintentional story Jonathan Huynh had deliberately constructed. On the contrary, they confirmed a cold truth. Kate had been attacked with deliberate intent, pushed to the absolute end to have her life taken, and every action causing her death was intentional. As for the killer, after murdering Kate, Jonathan Huynh did not leave the scene immediately. On the contrary, he remained at the apartment for quite a long time, enough to calmly calculate and begin planning to conceal his crime. Jonathan searched throughout the house, collecting items that could expose his actions, from clothing, blood-stained objects, to anything that might retain biological traces. To mislead the sense of smell and delay the discovery of the body, he opened the windows wide, then used everything available in the apartment to mask the smell of death. Dryer sheets, room spray, essential oils, all were utilized clumsily, but with full calculation. Notably, Jonathan even stuffed pain relief tablets into both of the victim's nostrils with the purpose of reducing odor and absorbing fluids, a detail showing he had thought very carefully about concealing the death, rather than acting in momentary panic as his later statements claimed. He also proceeded to clean the scene, attempting to erase the obvious traces of the crime. However, perhaps due to mental tension and lack of experience, Jonathan could not clean everything completely. For this reason, police were later still able to collect DNA samples and many strands of Kate's hair remaining on the belt, important evidence that helped expose the crime. After cleaning up, Jonathan stuffed Kate's body into the closet, an action both cold and desperate, hoping to hide the body for as long as possible. This very act delayed the discovery of the crime for nearly 48 hours, giving Jonathan enough time to construct a fake scenario and mislead those around him. Leaving the apartment, he took all of the victim's important personal belongings: phone, keys, wallet, and even Kate's car. The purpose was very clear: to create a fake scene suggesting Kate had angrily left home on her own, cutting off all suspicion of murder. The phone call around 6 p.m. on March 31st, which Jonathan made to Kimberly from Kate's own phone number, was just one link in that deceptive scenario, intended to make everyone believe Kate was still alive and had left on her own accord. However, no matter how carefully calculated, Jonathan still could not control the instincts of those who truly cared about Kate. Kimberly's alertness, combined with one seemingly small detail, Kate not paying rent on time on April 1st, something she had never done throughout their time living together, quickly turned concern into action. Kate's family was notified much sooner than Jonathan had anticipated, and it was precisely this that caused his entire plan to conceal the crime to completely collapse. When Kate's parents came to the apartment to check, the closet door was opened, and the horrifying truth could no longer be hidden. Kate's body was discovered, closing the chapter on the killer's cold lies while opening the path to bring Jonathan Huynh to face justice. The trial of Jonathan Huynh took place in September 2010 at the Los Angeles Superior Court, Long Beach branch. At trial, the prosecutor described defendant Jonathan Huynh as an obsessively jealous, controlling boyfriend who had harbored intentions to kill his girlfriend beforehand. The defense attorneys attempted to paint a different picture, acknowledging that Kate Suji's death occurred while she was with Jonathan, but arguing it was a tragic accident rather than intentional. The defense's main strategy was to argue that Kate died from asphyxiation during consensual intimate activity. Defendant Jonathan Huynh even took the stand to defend himself. However, the prosecutor pointed out that Jonathan had changed his story 3 times. first claiming to know nothing, then saying Kate had left, and finally claiming it was an accident during intimacy. This inconsistency made the jury doubt the defendant's credibility. Moreover, forensic evidence refuted the theory of an intimate accident. Examination reports showed that Kate and Jonathan had stopped being intimate before she was killed, and there were signs of an actual physical altercation. Finally, after approximately 2 weeks of trial, Jonathan Huyn was convicted of first-degree murder. His defense was unanimously rejected. On September 15, 2010, the court found Jonathan Huyn guilty with the aggravating circumstance of using a dangerous weapon, the belt. On October 20, 2010, the judge sentenced the defendant to life in prison with the possibility of parole only after a minimum of 26 years. Regarding civil liability, the court ordered Jonathan to pay $15,319.14 to the victim's family to cover funeral expenses, plus $7,500 to California's Victim Compensation Fund. And that concludes today's case. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.